Sharpening Skills for the TOEFL IBT. 4 Practice Tests, Book 1. Copyright 2007. Compass. All rights reserved.
Practice Test 1.
Listening section. Listen to part of a lecture in a psychology class.
So, we've been talking about human cognitive and social development. Now, I'd like to move along to discuss Abraham Maslow's hierarchy of needs, a very influential theory that has been widely applied both inside and outside the field of psychology in education, social work, and even criminal justice. Now, Maslow began his career studying the behavior of monkeys, and one of the most interesting things he noticed was that some of the monkeys' needs took precedence over others. Some needs appeared to be more important. For example, if the monkeys were both hungry and thirsty, they would seek water before food. See, you can only live for a few days without water, but food is still important. You still have to eat, but the need for water is stronger. The monkeys also needed to play to get exercise, but the needs for food and water were more pressing. Out of his observations of monkeys and later observation of people, Maslow developed his ideas into the now famous hierarchy of human needs. Let's take a look at each layer of these needs in greater detail. As the monkey story illustrates, the first layer, the physiological needs, is the foundation, the needs that must be met first. Unless you get enough oxygen, water, protein, salt, sugar, vitamins, and minerals, and unless you maintain a healthy pH balance, body temperature, and so on, you won't live long enough to worry about very many other needs. Moving on, the second layer of needs is, the need for safety and security. So let's say you meet all your physiological needs. Soon, you'll probably start thinking about finding stability and protection, developing structure, creating order, those kinds of things. Defined negatively, when you're no longer hungry and thirsty, fears and anxieties are your next concern. You want to find a safe neighborhood, job security, a retirement plan, and so on. Meet these needs, and you'll focus on the needs for love and belonging, which is the third level in Maslow's hierarchy of needs. You have your food, your comfortable shelter, your job security, and you begin to feel the need for friends, a partner, a sense of community even. If you don't meet these needs, you'll grow susceptible to loneliness and social anxieties, a major problem in modern urban societies, alienation. There are socially acceptable ways to meet these needs, getting married, joining a club or church, and less socially acceptable ways, like joining a gang or getting involved in a drug culture. Now we're at the fourth level, esteem, needs, and here, pay attention, Maslow notes 2 subsets. The lower one is the need for respect from others, status, fame, glory, recognition. Get the idea? The higher form involves the need for self-respect, confidence, achievement, freedom even. Now, this stratification of esteem needs is often debated, though I think Maslow had it right in the first place. Self-respect is the higher form. Unlike the respect of others, and we all know how fickle that is, once you gain self-respect, it's a lot harder to lose. Fail to meet your esteem needs, and you're a candidate for some significant psychological problems. Maslow didn't believe humans could meet all 4 levels of their needs and just stop and be content. They would continuously need to grow, emotionally, cognitively, and socially. This is what he refers to as self-actualization, the 5th level. Few people meet all 4 preceding levels of their needs. So, Maslow had less of an observable basis to define what self-actualization meant. And let's face it, this level is also the most abstract, the hardest to pin down. He did point out that self-actualized individuals, at least the ones he observed, tended to be autonomous, not overly concerned about social norms, yet at the same time had a strong sense of ethics and concern for the human species. They demonstrate a non-hostile sense of humor as well as a sense of humility and respect for others. They tended to be very creative, inventive people. One thing educators, for example, have taken from Maslow's theory is the importance of making sure children have their most basic needs met as forming an important foundation on which to teach them not only knowledge, but also the values of self-respect and respect for others. Let's take a brief look at how this is done, okay?
Now get ready to answer the questions. You may use your notes to help you answer. Number 2. According to the professor, what did Maslow realize from studying monkeys? Number 3. According to the professor, which of the following is a feature of self-actualized individuals?
Number 4. In the lecture, the professor describes the layers in Maslow's hierarchy of human needs. Indicate whether each of the following is mentioned as one of those layers.
Listen again to part of the lecture. Then answer the question.
Now we're at the fourth level, esteem, needs, and here, pay attention, Maslow notes two subsets. The lower one is the need for respect from others, status, fame, glory, recognition. Get the idea?
Number 5. Why does the professor say this?
Status, fame, glory, recognition. Get the idea?
Number 6. What would the professor most likely talk about next?
Listen to part of a conversation between a student and a professor.
Hi, Professor Wallerstein.
Hi, Joyce. What can I do for you?
Remember how I asked you if I could have an extension to finish my final paper for the term? Well, I have a little problem.
Right. I said that you could hand the paper in on Thursday morning before I leave for my conference. Oh, that's tomorrow already. Okay, so what's the problem?
Well, my computer crashed and I lost the paper, all my notes, my final revisions, everything. I don't know what to do now. I really put a lot of work into this paper. Remember how I showed you my draft twice? I don't want you to think that
Okay, look. These kinds of things happen. Have you checked with the computer support department to see if they can recover your paper from your computer? A guy named James over there is really great. He helped me with a similar problem once. Why don't you talk to him and see what he can do?
Yeah, I know him. I already went there this morning. He said my computer had this big virus, and that's what crashed it. And well, it pretty much ate my hard drive.
I see. Well, I still need your paper by tomorrow so that I can get the final grades in before I leave. You still have your last draft that I commented on, right?
Yeah.
Now, I realize that I handed the most recent one back to you last week, but why don't you try to outline some of the major revisions you made? Then you can type it all up in one of the computer labs and get it to me by tomorrow morning. It just isn't possible for me to give you an extension beyond that. Unfortunately, I don't get to decide when grades are due.
Well, I'll give it a shot, but I know it's not going to be as good as what I wrote before the computer crashed.
I understand that, Joyce, but we don't always get to choose our deadlines, so just do the best you can and get it to me by tomorrow. If you don't agree with the grade you end up with, we can discuss it before next semester starts up. Your second draft showed that you made considerable improvements over your first, and I always consider a student's efforts toward improvement a factor in my grading.
Okay, thanks, Professor. I'll get the paper to you first thing in the morning.
Great, I can't wait to read it. I'll be in my office between 9 and 10. Good luck.
Now get ready to answer the questions. You may use your notes to help you answer. Number 8. What does the student say about the computer support department? Number 10. Why must the student hand in the paper tomorrow morning? Choose two answers. Listen again to part of the conversation. Then answer the question.
Okay, look, these kinds of things happen. Have you checked with the computer support department to see if they can recover your paper from your computer? A guy named James over there is really great. He helped me with a similar problem once. Why don't you talk to him and see what he can do?
Number 11. What can be inferred about the professor's attitude? Listen again to part of the conversation. Then answer the question.
Your second draft showed that you made considerable improvements over your first, and I always consider a student's efforts toward improvement a factor in my grading.
Number 12. Why does the professor say this?
I always consider a student's efforts toward improvement a factor in my grading.
Listen to part of a lecture in a history class.
Today we're going to talk about what spices meant to medieval Europeans, what symbolic value they had. Most of you never give much thought to the salt and pepper in the cafeteria, or the supermarket, or a restaurant, am I right? They're inexpensive, readily available, pretty boring you might say, both of them. We tend to think of salt and pepper as a pair, but they actually have very dissimilar histories. Different journeys that led them to end up on our dinner tables. First, let's look at salt. In moderation, it is an essential part of a healthy diet, but it's so common nowadays we wouldn't consider it valuable. The attitude was different in, say, some kingdoms of Africa that maintained ancient salt trading routes across the Sahara Desert, some of which still exist today. Of course, people need some in their diet, but it was valuable mostly because it was one of the few substances known to keep foods from spoiling quickly. Our word salary comes from the Roman practice of paying soldiers partly in salt rather than entirely in money. But, back to my point, trying to lay out some symbolism for you here. While medieval Europeans would have considered salt a very necessary substance, they also considered it very mundane, nothing special, sort of like how we see it today. Now, pepper was the exact opposite. Medieval Europeans developed quite a powerful taste for pepper and other spices like cinnamon and nutmeg. Sure, you could use pepper or nutmeg or cinnamon to season your food, but they're not essential to the diet like salt. Some people believe that these spices were important for preserving food or even flavoring food that was no longer fresh. Well, that's not such a good explanation for the popularity of these spices, as medieval Europeans already had salt and plenty of native herbs to flavor or preserve food. Does anyone have any ideas why pepper and other spices might have been so popular? How about you, Diane?
Maybe they taste better?
Sort of. You're headed in the right direction. I mean, they were more desirable and taste may have been one factor, but something that's strange or different or exotic might be more interesting, right? And so, it was with pepper and other such spices like cinnamon, ginger, cardamom.
Sorry, Professor, but how exactly could pepper be exotic?
Good question. See, they didn't call this time period the Dark Ages for nothing. Travel and commerce across long distances were dangerous and rare. Your average European was generally not in contact with anyone outside his or her local world, say within a 10-mile radius or so, except through the church. But that's a whole different issue that we're going to bypass for the moment. Now where was I? Oh yes, so pepper came mainly from India and cinnamon from Ceylon, what we now call Sri Lanka. But very few medieval Europeans had the slightest idea where they came from. All they knew was that merchants could buy spices from Arabs in Egypt. Where the Arabs got them from was a mystery.
So, the spices were valuable just because they came from far away?
Yes, right, but even more than that, and this is what I want you to get out of our discussion today, because spices were rare, pretty much only purchased by the upper classes, nobility, not by the masses. There's no way you'd find pepper on a table in a medieval university dining hall, and if you did, you wouldn't take it for granted. You'd feel pretty special eating it. Because they came from so far off, well, the disconnected Europeans weren't quite sure where a lot of them came from, Spices were actually thought to have their origins in paradise.
So people actually believed spices came from heaven?
Well, not exactly what we think of as heaven today. In the worldview of medieval Europeans, paradise was some physical place on earth, someplace far off and unknown, but real. That's what gave exotic spices their symbolic value. Salt, like salt today, was available to all, a very democratic item, you might say. Pepper, cinnamon, and so on were reserved exclusively for the aristocrats, kings, queens, ruling nobility. Spices were more than useful. They set the rulers apart from their subjects and suggested that they, the higher classes, were closer to paradise than the commoners.
Now get ready to answer the questions. You may use your notes to help you answer.
Number 13. What is the lecture mainly about?
Number 15. According to the professor, Europeans probably did not. Number 16. Why does the professor mention that most Europeans in the Dark Ages only knew about the world within a 10-mile radius of their homes? Number 17. What does the professor suggest about medieval European attitudes toward pepper and salt? Listen again to part of the lecture. Then answer the question.
Travel and commerce across long distances were dangerous and rare. Your average European was generally not in contact with anyone outside his or her local world, say within a 10-mile radius or so, except through the church. But that's a whole different issue that we're going to bypass for the moment.
Number 18. Why does the professor say this?
But that's a whole different issue that we're going to bypass for the moment.
Number 2.
The professor notes that the common ancestor of a descent group may be
Number 3. Which statement accurately conveys a relationship described in the lecture?
Number 4. What does the professor say about Chinese Sioux descent groups?
Listen again to part of the lecture. Then answer the question.
Now then, here's where descent groups get interesting. Anthropologists study the rules descent groups use to decide membership. Where do you draw that line between who are your relatives and who aren't? And what are the consequences?
Number 6. Why does the professor ask this?
Where do you draw that line between who are your relatives and who aren't? And what are the consequences?
Number 8. In which building does the student currently live? Number 9. What does the woman say the student needs to do after he gets a confirmation letter? Listen again to part of the conversation. Then answer the question.
Sounds good. I just have one more question.
Sure.
Well, over at registration, they said I have a hold on my account since they think that I, owe money. How long do you think this will take?
Let's see. If your RA gets the letter in today, we could probably have it cleared up in a day or two.
Number 11.
What does the student imply when he says this?
How long do you think this will take?
Number 12. What will the student most likely do next? Now listen to part of a talk in an art history class. So, folks, this evening I want to move on from our previous discussion of Romanesque architecture to the new forms that emerged beginning in the 11th century, which came to be known as Gothic architecture. As you'll likely recall, Romanesque architecture mainly consisted of a return, after about a 600-year break, to using Roman forms and, adapting them for the creation of a new generation of monumental structures. We talked about the development of arches, barrel vaults, and, in particular, the rebirth of monumental sculpture, specifically as seen in the great portals that were built in the 11th and 12th centuries. Now then, at the end of the 12th century, we also began to see the emergence of a new architectural style, Gothic. So, I hope all of you read the assigned chapters, so maybe someone could tell us about a few of the key features of Gothic architecture?
Well, I seem to remember that the Gothic style emphasizes verticality, rising high and light, and that they used, let me just grab my notes here, huge glass windows, skeletal structures, pointed arches, high vaults, and pointed spires. I think there were a few other features.
Yeah, I remember the gargoyles, you know, those monster statues, and they also had the flying buttresses, right?
That's right. I'm glad you brought up the pointed arch and the flying buttress, two very important innovations. As you may recall in the reading, the pointed arch allowed for tall windows, often made of intricate stained glass designs. You can see some of the most colorful and interesting examples at Sainte-Chapelle in Paris. I think there's a picture of it in your book, actually. Right, then, the pointed arch, unlike the low, round Romanesque arch, allowed for tall windows and thus more light to enter than was possible in the older Romanesque churches and cathedrals. With the taller arches and colored stained glass windows, brighter, more magnificent spaces could be created. The Gothic cathedrals are quite bold in their aspirations to soar to greater heights, into the heavens. So next we have the flying buttress, the second feature of Gothic style that I want to talk about today. One that was important to the full development of the Gothic cathedrals. Does anyone have an idea of why that might be?
Maybe they allowed the sculptors to position figures like the gargoyles and others high above, but so that people on the ground could still see them.
No, I don't think that's quite it. The book mentioned something about a buttress being a means of support, but I think that has to do with supporting walls, not sculptures.
That's true. Earlier churches, even castles and Roman public buildings, used buttresses to support thick walls. So the flying buttress evolved from an existing form, and it allowed cathedrals to be built taller by providing support for higher vaulted ceilings. Its function was to transmit the thrust, the outward force and weight of a roof or a vault across an intervening space to a buttress on the outside of the building. By using flying buttresses, an architect could place windows or other openings in load-bearing walls, the walls that support the weight of the roof, which would allow more light to enter the building. Also, cathedrals could now soar to even greater heights, dizzying heights. For instance, if you look at the Ulm Cathedral in Germany, it rises to 530 feet, including the spire, another feature of Gothic style that I believe was mentioned in your book. Now, 530 feet, that's pretty tall. We're talking taller than the first modern skyscrapers, and built without the use of a steel skeleton or modern machinery.
So it was just made of stone?
For the most part, structures built in the Gothic style, originally that is, there are modern copies, Gothic revival we call it. For the most part, Gothic structures of the Middle Ages were built entirely of carved stone blocks cemented together. Wood frames were used during construction and for some of the final decorative work, but rarely for structural purposes. And that, That brings me to the third feature I want to talk about, vaults. Remember the Romanesque vaults?
Yeah, I think they had the rounded low vaults and then the longer barrel vault, and they had the broad, stout columns.
Exactly. With the pointed arch and the flying buttress, among other changes that we'll get to, builders could create higher vaulted ceilings that were more open, more airy. Unlike the round Romanesque arch, the pointed arch distributed weight downward more effectively, thus allowing for narrower columns and more open vaulted areas, again, letting in more light and air throughout the building. Now get ready to answer the questions. You may use your notes to help you answer.
Number 13.
What is the talk mainly about? Number 14. By mentioning Romanesque architecture, the professor Number 15. According to the talk, impressive cathedral windows were made possible by the use of Number 16. The lecturer notes that the Cathedral of Ulm is remarkably Listen again to part of the talk. Then answer the question. For the most part, structures built in the Gothic style, originally that is, there are modern copies, Gothic revival we call it. For the most part, Gothic structures of the Middle Ages were built entirely of carved stone blocks cemented together. Number 17. Why does the professor say this? Originally, that is, there are modern copies, Gothic revival we call it. Number 18. According to the talk, which of the following architectural features matches each style? Now listen to two students as they discuss the announcement.
Oh man, did you hear about how they're getting rid of the school newspaper?
Yeah, I heard, but I don't see what the big deal is. When I first started here, nobody read it anyway, and they still don't read it. Everybody is too busy with other stuff.
Yeah, I guess you're right. But still, every now and then I pick up a copy of the paper. Some of the comic strips are funny, and I really like that one guy's music column.
Yeah, but you can still read it online. Like I said, what's the big deal?
I guess it really isn't so important after all.
That's what I'm saying. I mean, look, we have the best football team in the state. We should show our support and build them the best stadium as well. Besides, my dad went to this school and he says that he and other alumni are really excited about the new stadium. They might even give a big donation to help finance it. If it costs a little more money to make sure our stadium is the best, well, I think it's worth it. Who cares about a student newspaper anyway? I think it's more important that we express our pride in our college team.
The man expresses his opinion of the announcement made by the college administrator. State his opinion and explain the reasons he gives for holding that opinion. Now read the passage about mutual symbiosis. You have 45 seconds to read the passage. Begin reading now. Now listen to part of a lecture on this topic.
Today, we are going to talk about mutual symbiotic relationships. Perhaps the classic example of mutual symbiosis is that of bees and flowering plants. Bees travel from flower to flower in search of nectar and pollen. Back in their hives, the bees convert the energy-rich nectar and protein-rich pollen into food. With ample food supplies, the hive grows and flourishes. Okay, so bees have dense hairs on their legs that are used to collect pollen. As they fly from flower to flower gathering food, they are also spreading the pollen from one flower to another. Now, flowers have both male and female reproductive apparatus, and in order for flowering plants to reproduce, one plant needs the pollen from another plant. And that's where the bees come in, inadvertently pollinating the plants, thus aiding in the plant's reproduction. Sometimes the relationship is that of a symbiote, living literally within a host. Let's take an example close to home, really close. Inside each of our intestines are billions of microscopic bacteria. I'm not referring to the ones that make you sick, but rather the bacteria that aid in digestion. See, without these beneficial bacteria, we couldn't digest much of what we eat. Moreover, the bacteria also help train the immune system to better identify and respond to harmful bacteria.
Explain how the professor's examples demonstrate mutually symbiotic relationships. Now listen to a conversation between a student and his academic advisor.
Hey, Miss Harris, it's registration time again.
Hi, Dale. So how is your schedule for next semester coming along?
Oh, not so great, actually. I'm trying to pick all my classes so I can finish my major by the end of the spring. The problem is there's this one upper-level chemistry course I need.
Let me guess, the class is already filled up.
Yeah, how'd you know?
Another student came to see me this morning. Seems there are only 2 upper-level chemistry courses for majors, and both are filled up already. I'll tell you what I told her already. Go see the professors and ask them for special permission to register for the class.
That might work, except I've had the one professor before, and he's pretty strict about his classes not having too many students. And the other class, well, doesn't seem so interesting.
Let's see then. The other option is that you could talk to the department chair and see if you can do independent study. I mean, since you've started here, you've impressed me as a pretty bright and capable student. I mean, I wouldn't suggest this option to just anyone.
Thanks. I hadn't considered that option at all. I've never done an independent study course before. I wonder what they're like.
The student and his advisor discuss 2 possible solutions to the man's problem. Describe the problem. Then state which of the 2 solutions you prefer and explain why. Now listen to part of a talk in an astronomy class.
Today, I'd like to talk about how stars form. I'm sure all of you have read this week's chapter and are now familiar with the 2 key ingredients in star formation, interstellar gases and dust. It may be hard to imagine that there is much of anything in outer space aside from existing stars and planets. However, in the last class, I mentioned that space is not empty. In fact, 99% of space consists of very low-density gas. The remaining 1% consists of dust, just like the dust that accumulates under your bed. That gas and dust is distributed unevenly, and because it's not just spread all over the place, this has consequences for star formation. Half of all the interstellar gas is compressed into dense clouds called, well, nebulae, a term derived from the Latin word nebula, meaning cloud. These clouds can vary greatly in temperature and density. The other half is found throughout the rest of the universe in extremely low densities. Now, a moment ago, I said that the distribution of the dust and gas has consequences for star formation. Well, that's because stars form when dense clumps of interstellar gas collapse. Consider the case of a small, dense nebula. To convert it into a star requires compression and heat. How, you may ask, does that happen? Well, that's a good question, since dense interstellar clouds are ordinarily stable. A tremendous amount of force is required to start a collapse and thus trigger compression. That force will come in the form of a shock wave traveling through space. One source of such a shock wave is the supernova, which is an exploding star. When a strong enough shock wave hits the dense cloud of gas and dust, it causes the center to compress into a protostar. Then, as the protostar collapses into itself, it creates heat through nuclear fission and forms the core of a new star.
Using points and examples from the talk, explain how stars form.
Writing section.
Now listen to part of a lecture on the topic you just read about.
So, often in science, proponents of new technologies get excited and overlook other options. Take the problem of the hydrogen fuel cell car as a solution to the problems associated with climate change. It is now generally accepted that burning oil and other fossil fuels causes gases to be released into the atmosphere. Cars and other vehicles are major producers of greenhouse gases. And we also know that as these gases build up, they act like a greenhouse, raising the Earth's temperature. Changes in the climate have already resulted in the melting of glaciers in Greenland, and that means we may witness a rise in sea level. You may have heard about hydrogen fuel cell technology as a solution to this problem. However, you should know, proponents overemphasize the benefits of this technology. In fact, there are better ways to approach the problem of climate change that will bring more immediate benefits and are less costly. First, let's look at the problems with hydrogen fuel cell technology. Supporters estimate that with investment now, industry could have hydrogen cars on the road in 10 or 15 years. Well, that's too long if you're talking about making an impact in reducing greenhouse gases. It is a misdirection of resources. We need to cut greenhouse gases quickly, and this can be done by increasing fuel efficiency now. For example, industry already is producing hybrid gasoline-electric cars. We have them already, and with more support from government and the public, they could be the standard. Presently, these cars give off 30 to 50% less greenhouse gas than gasoline-only vehicles. But here, listen to this. With advances in the technology, a new generation of hybrids will run on ethanol gasoline blends that cut greenhouse gas emissions down to 1/10 of what hybrids today produce. The change is huge, and it can happen quickly. If you're going to invest in research and development, you'll get more for your money with ethanol blend hybrids, and the results for the environment will come sooner. Secondly, supporters of the hydrogen car are too optimistic about the development of a supporting infrastructure. They wildly underestimate the costs. An important study showed that it would cost over $500 billion to create a hydrogen infrastructure for just 40% of light vehicles, and that's assuming more cars don't end up on the road. Okay, so this gets worse. Another study showed that it would cost $20 billion to supply just 2% of the cars with hydrogen by 2020. That's after you paid for the infrastructure. Besides, where does the hydrogen come from? It has to be made by burning fossil fuels. So while supporters may say hydrogen burns clean in your car, they are telling only half the story. A lot of greenhouse gases are created to make that hydrogen for your car. There are also costs associated with adopting hybrids and using more ethanol. Ethanol requires special storage and delivery that costs money too, but current estimates are much lower than those for hydrogen.
Practice Test 2.
Listening section.
Listen to part of a lecture in a sociology class.
Morning, class. Sorry I'm a little late. I had a bit of an accident in the parking lot. Nothing serious, but it slowed me down. A student from another class I teach... Well, actually, I'll get into that more in a few minutes. Okay, last week we looked at status hierarchy, how societies have social classes, socioeconomic hierarchies, and these are ranked based on status, and status is used to divvy up jobs and responsibilities and maintain some social control. Well, today I want to talk a little about signs, status signs or signals. These terms are interchangeable. Status signs or signals that we look at to get some idea of a person's status. Well, let me give you an example from the non-human world first. Remember the movie we saw last week about gorilla society? One sign you were told to look for immediately to help you identify the dominant male gorilla was silver hair on his back. Well, that's a sign that's pretty specific to gorillas. But I guess, come to think of it, I guess you could say that, in some cases, silver hair on males also works as a sign of status among humans. although on the head, not the back. Humans, in fact, probably have the widest range of status signs of all animals, of ways to signal status. And our signs are also more flexible and more arbitrary. They vary from culture to culture, from decade to decade. Think of some of our culture's status symbols that exist today. Like owning a big SUV. It means you're rich, right? You don't care what gas costs. Or a particular brand of athletic shoes, gym shoes we used to call them, before they started signifying higher status. What about an occupation? That can be a sign of your status. An athlete, an actor, a doctor. So, silver hair, clothing, cars, professions, to one degree or another, these are all signs of status in our society. Up to this point, I've been talking about signs that show high status. There are also signs that signal lower status. Again, occupations, like very dirty or tedious laborer jobs that pay minimum wage. Or in some contexts, old, ragged clothes. Being a child as opposed to an adult, you get the idea. So, status signs can be divided into two types, constant and controllable. Constant, of course, means it doesn't readily change. In fact, these signs are exhibited even if the person doesn't necessarily want to signal his status. They're the most basic ways we have of identifying people in our society, and they're used in most human societies to help determine status. Gender, family name, ethnic markers, even reputation. The problem is that low status can, in effect, be forced on you. You can't control the circumstances of your birth. If some bias is attached to your ethnicity, family name, gender, and so on, your individual character or achievements may be irrelevant to your status. So this kind of status signal can reinforce social inequality from one generation to the next. You can pass on a fantastic reputation, a good name, or a bad name, your status, to your kids, even though they may not want it. In the United States, you don't hear the term so much anymore, but you used to, blue bloods, people who belong to socially prominent families, like the Kennedys, a status sign, the Roosevelts, the Vanderbilts. On the other hand, we've got controllable signs that we can quickly change on purpose, or sometimes we change them accidentally or subconsciously. Oh yes, here a real-life experience. You get into a little fender bender in the school parking lot. You're mad, you're going to be late to class now, and you storm out of your car roaring, aggressive, in a threatening manner. You want to show the other driver, dominate the situation so it can go your way. Then you recognize that other driver. It's your professor. Oh, you back down quickly, grin sheepishly, shrug your shoulders apologetically, lower your voice, and drop the anger. Now you want to, convey a sense of appropriate, respect, deference to that higher status, to let her know that you know it's actually your fault. Controllable signs, language, what we say and our tone, nonverbal gestures, clothes, material goods like cars and iPods, these are all controllable status signals. One more interesting thing. I shouldn't leave you with the impression that it's two ends of a scale and never the twain shall meet. It's a continuum, really. For instance, you can change your physical posture quickly. It's a controllable status sign. But you probably won't be changing cars every few months. That status sign lasts a lot longer. And even constant signs that are, well, as I said, constant, but even they can be changed. Playwrights have had great fun changing or reversing constant status signs in their characters. Transformations from a prince to a pauper, that sort of thing, or Cinderella. None of this is set in stone. It's just a convenient framework for looking at the way we humans signal status.
Now get ready to answer the questions. You may use your notes to help you answer. Number 1. What is the lecture mainly about? Number 3. According to the professor, what is one problem with constant status signs? Number 5. In the lecture, the professor describes characteristics of constant and controllable status signals. Indicate to which category each of the following belongs. Number 6. How is the control of status signs illustrated in the professor's story about the accident in the parking lot? Number 7. Why does the student go to see her professor? Number 8. What problem is the student having? Number 9. The student assures the professor that she uses antivirus software. Why does the professor still think the problem is with the student's computer? Listen again to part of the conversation. Then answer the question.
Well, I haven't been able to do the last quiz. I mean, I can get on the site, but it's so slow. It's really frustrating. I can't... There's like a delay with everything I type.
A delay?
Number 10. Why does the professor say this?
A delay?
Number 11. What does the professor think about the computer help desk? Listen to part of a talk in an economics class. We've been looking this past week at modern capitalist economies, and we've noted that governments get involved in making economic policy to varying degrees. We've pretty much agreed that in this day and age, you can't really have a government that ignores the economy, at the very least. Governments are involved in economies because they buy goods and services, right? In fact, in the United States, the federal government is the largest customer in the country. So, the government influences the economy directly through what it buys and how much money it spends. But are they the only actors involved in economic policy making? That's what we're going to talk about today, how economic policy is made, and, we'll use the United States as our example. So, let's see. Who can get us started? What are some factors that help determine economic policy?
The political parties, the Democrats and the Republicans, seem to have different ideas about how our economy should work.
What about interest groups? Different industries lobby for different bills they want passed, like deregulating an industry or protecting another. And Congress, of course. They help make economic policy, right?
And doesn't the economy itself make a difference?
Can you give us an example of what you mean, Anne?
Well, if the economy seems to be slowing down, people aren't buying as much stuff, and so companies start laying people off. Well, there needs to be some policy to get the economy moving again.
Good. Your answers are all correct. They're all factors that help make economic policy. So, let's categorize these factors. Let's see if I can remember them all. The Congress, political parties, the economy itself, what else? Oh yeah, interest groups. Well, you've hit the three main areas that affect economic policy in the United States. First, we have structural factors. This starts with the economy itself, like Anne said. Whether or not it's healthy, and even before that, the complexity of the economy in the first place. A couple hundred years ago, the American economy was a pretty simple market economy. But today, it's gotten so complex that most people think that you can't just let it go on its own. Something that happens in one part of the economy, a major corporation declaring bankruptcy, for instance, can affect so many other parts. So these are structural factors. How developed the economy is, how strong it is. Okay, moving on. Another structural factor is the political climate. I don't mean climate exactly. Context or culture, political culture. Where do we start from? What's the general philosophy towards the role government should play in the economy? These all deal with structure. Now, you also mentioned political parties, interest groups, and I'm surprised you didn't say voters or public opinion. Don't any of you believe in democracy? Well, this is the second group of factors we have in making economic policy, political factors. I believe the first thing mentioned was political parties. That's understandable. The political parties in the U.S. today are pretty much defined by their economic beliefs, aren't they? Republicans want fewer taxes, less government regulation of the economy, less government spending. The Democrats want to use economic policies to lower unemployment. They worry about disparities in income, the gap between the rich and the poor, and the diminishing middle class. And for the final category, we've got governmental factors. What did you all mention? Congress, that's right. We've got a government institution called the Federal Reserve Board. And hey, how about the president? He certainly has a big role to play in economic policy making, doesn't he? So let's recap here. 3 groups of factors that, go into making the policy. Structural, like the economy itself. Political, for example, interest groups. And finally, governmental factors. The president or Congress.
But is any one factor more important than the others?
Well, if we think about it, I suspect we'd conclude that one group of factors might be more important, or maybe 1 or 2 specific factors might be more important at one particular time. But it changes, and we're pretty unique in this way. We've got a democracy with a system of checks and balances built into our government. And I think that makes it possible for a wide variety of actors to be involved in the process. The policies we finally come up with, the ones that get implemented, they end up being the result of a whole mix of factors. Although ultimately, it's the government that passes the laws and regulations and makes the decisions. But they do have to answer to the public, to us, and they can't ignore what's going on in the economy itself. Now get ready to answer the questions. You may use your notes to help you answer. Number 13. What is the talk mainly about? Number 14. What are the 3 categories of factors that play a role in making economic policy? Number 15. How is the talk organized? Listen again to part of the talk. Then answer the question.
And doesn't the economy itself make a difference?
Can you give us an example of what you mean, Anne? Number 16. Why does the professor respond to the student's question with a question of his own? Listen again to part of the talk. Then answer the question. I'm surprised you didn't say voters or public opinion. Don't any of you believe in democracy? Number 17. What can be inferred from the professor's comment? Listen to part of a lecture in a biology class.
Okay, so we've been discussing how living things are classified, and now we're going to take a look at animals. Specifically, I want to start with our own species, Homo sapiens. A bit of a background on that name itself, as you might remember. We've talked about how Carolus Linnaeus had this idea to categorize plants and animals according to their similarities. So, Linnaeus is the one who named our species Homo sapiens, literally, wise man. Sometimes it's a little difficult to understand why he called us that, isn't it? Anyway, he also decided that we, of course, had to be ranked above all the other animals. So the group we fit in, the order, is called primates. Comes from Latin, means first in rank. All right, today I want to talk a bit about the order of primates, how they're defined, what families make up the order, that kind of thing, with special focus on the simians. There are simians and prosimians in the primate order. Prosimians obviously come before simians, hence the prefix pro. They come before them in time. They're less evolved than the simians, I guess you could say. Anyway, that doesn't matter too much now because I'm not going to talk about prosimians today. Okay, let's see. There are 6 natural groupings of primates. The first 3 are the prosimians that we won't cover today. So the other 3 are simians. Simians include New World monkeys, Old World monkeys, and finally apes and humans. But wait, before I go into any detail about the simians, I'd better give you a general idea of what characteristics define the primates. Probably the most important thing is that all primates are or were at one time tree dwellers. They lived in trees. So they have some characteristics that are essential, that are at least helpful if you're going to live in a tree. 5 digits on the end of each limb, not tree limb, I'm talking about the primates. Their arms and legs, of course. And opposable thumbs. That means that the thumb can be placed opposite each finger. Try to do that with your middle finger and index finger. You can't. Some primates, but not us, have opposable toes too. This opposability, if you will, in combination with all the fingers and toes, makes primates particularly well-suited for grasping branches. And another thing about those fingers and toes, those digits, they've got pads on the ends that are filled with nerves. So they're good sense organs. Hot, cold, rough, smooth, slippery, wet, dry, soft, hard. You get the picture. So what else would help if you're living in a tree? Well, good vision, good sight. Primates have a better developed sense of sight than they do a sense of smell. Compared to other animals, dogs for instance, primates can't track scents too well. Those eyes, being so important, are protected by a circle of bone. Unlike dogs, primates have eyes that look forward. A dog's eyes look sideways. So looking forward means that at some point in front of us, the fields of view of the 2 eyes overlap. The primate brain uses this overlap to produce depth perception. And how is depth perception helpful? Well, when you're moving through the forest, on the ground, or from branch to branch, tree to tree, that depth perception is real useful. Okay, digits on the ends of limbs, opposability, sense organs on the digits, sharp eyesight. Oh, one more, the brain. Primate brains are large relative to body size, and they're more complex. And another special thing about primates, after a pregnancy that lasts for several months, the female primate usually has one baby, just one offspring at a time, and that baby needs a lot of care. It grows slowly and really depends on its mother. And that's actually good because that's what lets primates develop complicated social organizations. That long period of dependency is used to socialize the babies into primate society and to teach them to pass down knowledge from the prior generation. Before we call it a day, I want to point out a couple of things about apes and humans, why that group is separated from the other 5, the group we're in. It's based on morphology. That's an organism's form and structure. Apes and humans have barrel-shaped chests. We're relatively large, with comparatively large brains. And of course, one of the most visible differences, unlike the other 2 groups of simians, and all 3 groups of prosimians, apes and humans are missing something, a tail.
Now get ready to answer the questions. You may use your notes to help you answer. Listen again to part of the lecture. Then answer the question.
So, Linnaeus is the one who named our species Homo sapiens. literally, wise man. Sometimes it's a little difficult to understand why he called us that, isn't it?
Number 3. The professor's question implies that she Number 4. Indicate whether the attributes below are characteristic of all primates according to the lecture. Number 5. Why does the professor mention the eyes of dogs? Number 6. What differentiates apes and humans from other primates? Listen to part of a conversation between a student and a university administrator.
Well, I must admit, Ms. Roberts, I don't get many requests from students for a meeting.
Thank you for seeing me. I won't take up much of your time. I was wondering about the menus in the dining halls. How you decide what to serve each meal.
Well, that's pretty much left up to our dietitian and our chef. Is there something wrong with the food?
Oh, no, I mean, it's good. It is good, but recently I've been having trouble finding things I can eat.
Do you have a food allergy?
No, not exactly.
Are you on a restricted diet? We offer low sodium, low carb, low fat, high protein.
Well, actually, you see, I've just recently, I'm a vegan now, and even though the food's good...
I'm sorry, you're a what?
A vegan, a strict vegetarian. I don't eat any animal products at all.
Not even eggs or cheese, milk?
No, I'm sorry, but nothing that comes from an animal.
Well, I know we have vegetable offerings every meal except breakfast, I guess. And there's fruit.
Well, yes, but, I thought maybe, I was wondering if maybe one of the dining halls could have some vegan main courses, along with the other stuff, and soy milk.
We have over 1,000 students, you know. It's really not possible to fix special meals just for 1 or 2 people.
Oh, I wouldn't be the only one. A couple of my friends are vegans, and there are a lot of vegetarians here and people who just enjoy a non-meat meal once in a while. I've been asking around, and...
You know, we have a food services advisory board here. They make recommendations for policies. How would you like to be on it?
What do I have to do?
Well, the board meets once a month unless there's a special meeting called...
No, I meant to get on the board. Is there an election or something?
No. The members are appointed. We could use another student.
And then I can get things added to the menu?
Well, I can't guarantee that, but you could certainly make your case. If you can show that there is enough of a demand, and if the chef can find some cost-effective vegan recipes that will work in our kitchens...
Oh, I'm sure that I could help with that.
Well, Miss Roberts, I appreciate your interest. Could you come to our meeting next Tuesday night?
I sure can. Thanks a lot. I was so afraid you'd say, no way.
Now get ready to answer the questions. You may use your notes to help you answer. Number 8. Why does the director mention how many students attend the university? Number 9. According to the conversation, which steps are most likely to lead to the addition of vegan food to the menus? Choose 2 answers. Number 10. How does the director decide to address the students' concerns? Number 11. Why is the student in a better mood at the end of the conversation? Listen again to part of the conversation. Then answer the question.
Well, Miss Roberts, I appreciate your interest. Could you come to our meeting next Tuesday night?
I sure can. Thanks a lot. I was so afraid you'd say, no way.
Number 12. What does the woman imply when she says this?
I was so afraid you'd say, "No way."
Listen to part of a lecture in a psychology class.
One of the more interesting, and I must say, to date, not well understood, not even well researched. You'll understand why as I describe the phenomenon. But it's fascinating because most of us have had the experience, is the experience of déjà vu. It's a memory, isn't it? Or at least it seems to be. Hold on a minute. We've had this lecture before, haven't we? I distinctly remember Mark sitting there in the front row, that red sweater, and, I'm really sorry, guys. I didn't realize till just now that we've done this already. Give me a moment to regroup and we'll move on to the next topic.
Dr. Watson, excuse me.
Yes, Mark?
Well, you haven't talked about déjà vu in this course yet.
I haven't?
No, and, this is the first time I've worn this sweater. I just got it yesterday.
You're right, of course. But if I truly had been experiencing a case of déjà vu, I wouldn't be so quick to agree with you. I might go along, but in my mind, I'd know somehow, that I had indeed given this very class, this very lecture before. No matter what you said, I wouldn't be able to shake that feeling. And that's déjà vu, a strong, intense sensation of familiarity with a place or situation, that you've been there before, done that before, even though logically it's not possible. The déjà vu memory is impossible. I didn't expect such an apt example. How could I remember Mark sitting in the front row with that red sweater if this is the first time he's worn it? Déjà vu in French literally means already seen. Studies suggest that maybe about 2/3, some even say up to 90%, but the precise number isn't so important, except to acknowledge that it's not a rare phenomenon. Anyway, some 2/3 of the population have experienced déjà vu at one time or another, and we can only describe it anecdotally for the most part. By anecdotally, I mean we have to rely on reports of déjà vu experiences, because so far we haven't found a way to make it happen, to reproduce it in a laboratory setting. That makes it difficult to study. So, what are the characteristics of déjà vu? Well, it seems to occur randomly, lasts anywhere from a few seconds to a few minutes. Often there's also a vague feeling of premonition, some kind of sense of the future, of what's going to happen next, although it seems that the actual next step to predicting the future never quite happens. It's a real strong sensation that something happening to you right now in the present has already happened. You feel like you're remembering a previous experience of it, even though it couldn't possibly have happened to you before. Experiencing the present as something that already happened in the past, but actually it didn't, and you can't really pinpoint when it happened, not specifically, so it's an undefined past, a vague time. You're just sure you've been there before. There are a lot of theories out there trying to explain déjà vu. We used to think that the memory part of the brain functioned like a filing cabinet, full of memories, recollections, ready to pull out when needed or desired, although sometimes a memory would get misplaced, lost. But since the 1970s, research into how the brain remembers has showed us that it's not like a filing cabinet, and in fact each memory is made up of a complex network of, signals, and those signals aren't grouped together in the brain, they're scattered all over. So maybe déjà vu can be explained as problems with these signals, something going wrong. Or maybe the brain is malfunctioning as it's trying to process information it's receiving. Or maybe the brain is confusing something similar in the present situation to a real memory and converts it somehow into déjà vu. Or finally, maybe the brain gets distracted from the present, and when it comes back to focus again on the present, it feels like a memory. There's no concrete explanation as of yet. Here are a couple more tantalizing tidbits about déjà vu. It seems that children don't experience it until about the age of 8 or 9. And from this, we're thinking that it has something to do with the brain reaching a particular stage of development. And déjà vu seems to be more frequent among teenagers and 20-somethings. Oh, and there seems to be a relationship between being stressed or tired and having an experience of déjà vu.
Now get ready to answer the questions. You may use your notes to help you answer. Number 14. How does the professor illustrate déjà vu? Listen again to part of the lecture. Then answer the question.
I didn't expect such an apt example. How could I remember Mark sitting in the front row with that red sweater if this is the first time he's worn it?
Number 15. What does the professor imply when she says this?
I didn't expect such an apt example.
Number 16. How does anecdotal evidence relate to the study of the phenomenon of déjà vu? Number 17. Why does the professor mention the brain functioning like a filing cabinet? Listen again to part of the lecture. Then answer the question.
Or maybe the brain is confusing something similar in the present situation to a real memory and converts it somehow into déjà vu. Or finally, maybe the brain gets distracted from the present, and when it comes back to focus again on the present, it feels like a memory. There's no concrete explanation as of yet.
Number 18. What does the professor mean when she says this?
There's no concrete explanation as of yet.
Speaking section.
Describe a favorite place in your town or city where you like to go, and explain why you like it. Include details and examples to support your explanation. Some students study in a quiet place. Others study in a place that has a lot of background noise. For instance, a blaring television or music playing. Which method of studying do you think is better for students and why? Now listen to two students as they discuss the editorial.
That's strongly stated. I wonder if anything will come of it.
It seems a little harsh to me, and it's counter to the whole idea of a university.
What do you mean?
Well, a university should encourage different opinions, free speech. Getting rid of the graduation speaker just because they disagree with something she said or did, well, isn't that like censorship?
I don't think so. It doesn't make sense to have a speaker who doesn't even believe in university education.
I don't think you can make that conclusion just because she doesn't believe in using government money for student loans. In fact, I think that if someone agrees to speak at a graduation, it's because they really do appreciate how important education is.
Well, generally, I'd say you're right. But I don't know in this case. Don't you think ensuring that young people get a college education should be a top priority for the government?
I definitely think it has to be a priority, but I'm not sure government is the way to make that happen. Instead of trying to silence her, the newspaper should engage her on the issues, do an in-depth interview, challenge her to explain her vote.
The man expresses his opinion of the editorial in the student publication. State his opinion and explain the reasons he gives for holding that opinion. Now read the passage about physiognomy. You have 45 seconds to read the passage. Begin reading now. Now listen to part of a lecture on this topic.
Lots of experiments seem to show that the features of the face over which, short of plastic surgery, a person has little control, and facial expressions, which we can more readily manipulate, right, do indeed affect social relationships. One interesting experiment happened about a decade ago. Romania, a former communist country, held presidential elections in 1996. In the first round of voting, 16 candidates vied for the office of president. For the most part, the voting public had no idea who any of these candidates were. But all the candidates participated in a nationally televised debate. They were all white males in their 40s, 50s, and 60s. Oh, and for the debate, they were all similarly dressed, in suits, I imagine. So researchers showed videotape from the debate to Americans who couldn't speak Romanian and, of course, knew nothing about Romanian politics or the election. Nevertheless, these Americans, based on seeing short clips of the candidates participating in the debate, the Americans were remarkably successful in predicting their electability. There was a high correlation between Americans' perception of how electable a candidate was and how many votes he received from the Romanian electorate. The Americans were able to judge how well the candidates would do based on looks and personal impressions, with no idea of what the candidate was saying.
The professor describes an experiment involving presidential candidates in Romania. Explain how the experiment is related to physiognomy. Now listen to a conversation between two students.
So, Melissa, I've been thinking about how to conduct the interviews we need for our film. I think we should film the entire interview from the outset.
But, Michael, won't we waste a lot of film that way? Shouldn't we do some kind of preliminary interview before we start filming? You know, ask some soft questions to put the subjects at ease, and then turn on the camera and ask the big ones?
I think it's better to get it all on film just in case. You never know when someone's going to say something we can use. And besides, people don't need to be put at ease. We all grew up on film, remember? I mean, what kid our age hasn't had mom or dad attending every sports activity, every grade school drama or concert with camcorder in hand? And now digital. Everyone's a film star. No big deal.
Maybe for some it's no big deal. But most people still get nervous when it comes to a real film, not just some home movie. And we don't want them to be thinking about the camera, which, by the way, remember, is quite a bit bigger than your digital camera. Plus, we'll have lights and a sound recorder. It's a different experience.
I still think it's more important to film everything. And to not worry about making people comfortable. Spontaneity is the key.
No. First, we should interview them on tape, get some idea of who they are, how they react, and then we'll film the heart of the interview.
It's too much of a risk. We'll either miss getting something important on film, or it'll end up looking too rehearsed.
Not if we plan our interviews carefully. If we do it your way, people could be so nervous that they won't make any sense.
I'm not so sure.
The students discuss two possible solutions to their problem. Briefly describe the problem. Then state which solution you prefer and explain why. Using points and examples from the talk, explain what prices are and how they have evolved.
Writing section.
Now listen to part of a lecture on the topic you just read about.
For quite a long time now, scientists have believed that the mucus of the white tree frog, mucus that's a thick liquid, the mucus and the pads on its toes hold the key to the tree frog's its ability to climb slippery trees and other surfaces, and to perch upside down on branches. Of course, these are essential abilities for any amphibian that's going to make its home in a tree. Scientists hypothesized that a combination of the viscosity, how fast or slow a liquid runs, helps keep the pads covered with the liquid. It doesn't drain away fast, and the surface tension of the mucus helps increase its adhesive power. So scientists have been putting their theories to the test. Recently, some researchers in England came up with some fascinating and rather unexpected, I must add, results. What got them thinking about this line of research in the first place was an observation of some tree frogs climbing on rocks over which water was flowing. How would this mucus be working through the flowing water? Well, the scientists did some studies and discovered a couple of important things. First, they discovered that the mucus layer between the toe pad of the frog and whatever it was standing on, that mucus layer was so thin, we're talking a millionth of a millimeter here, infinitesimal, that the thickness was, to quote them, indistinguishable from zero. Basically, there was no mucus layer between the frog's toe pads and the surface. They were in direct dry contact with whatever the frog was standing on. All the mucus was squeezed out through the channels that surrounded the pad cells. The second thing they discovered was that the viscosity of the tree frog's mucus was nowhere near as high as they expected, only half again as viscous as water. The scientists concluded from this that actually that design of the toe pads, those hexagonal cells and little pegs and channels, that design likely evolved to rapidly drain away the mucus from the toe pads rather than to keep it there. That is, to drain it away so that the toe pads could grip. One final thing. They looked at the force with which the tree frog's toe pads cling to the surface. What did they find? Well, the toe pads held their strength to cling for 2 minutes at least, and 2 minutes was long past the point when the mucus would have all drained away based on its viscosity level. Again, it wasn't the mucus that was enabling the tree frogs to cling and climb on those slippery surfaces. Back to the drawing board, because clearly there is something in the white tree frog's toes that is giving it this extraordinary clinging and climbing ability. What's holding them to the surfaces? Oh, and by the way, now there's another question. If all the mucus white tree frogs produce isn't used for glue to help the frog stick to surfaces, well, then what is it used for?
Summarize the points made in the lecture, explaining how they cast doubt on points made in the reading passage.
Practice Test 3.
Listening section. Listen to part of a lecture in a biology class.
Today I'm going to talk about something we all use every day, even right now as you all sit in your chairs poised to take notes. No, not your brains. I'm talking about, our muscles. What are they? How do they work? I think that you can all guess that muscles produce body movement. Here's a definition for you. Muscles are tissues that produce movement in the body when they contract. Simple, right? We move when our muscle tissues tighten, and each muscle is made up of a lot of individual muscle fibers. Vertebrates, animals with a backbone, a spinal column. We don't have to get more technical than that for today's lecture. That's us, humans. Dogs, fish, birds. Vertebrates have 3 main kinds of muscles. There's the cardiac muscle, the heart muscle, right? And of course, that's the only place it's found, the heart. Uniquely, it never rests, and if it did, you'd be in some serious trouble. All right. Then we have smooth muscles. They're called that because the tissue, the muscle fibers, they're smooth. Long, thin cells, sheets of cells, really. They're also sometimes called involuntary muscles. The nervous system controls them automatically. We're not even necessarily aware that they're working a lot of the time. For example, our intestines digesting food. That's the work of smooth muscles. We don't have to think about digesting food. Our intestines just do it. But by far the muscles we're most familiar with, aware of, are the skeletal or striated muscles. These are responsible for the movement of the body. I suspect these are the muscles most of you thought about when I began the lecture. So, skeletal muscles are, of course, called that because they're attached to 2 parts of the skeleton, parts that move relative to each other, like arms and legs. If you want to bring those 2 parts of the skeleton together, you contract the skeletal muscles that are connecting them. Oh, and striated, they're also called striated muscles. Everything has to have 2 names. Striated refers to how the fibers look. Long cylindrical striped fibers, that's what striated means, striped. Now, I just finished describing smooth muscles and telling you that they're all so-called involuntary muscles, but actually skeletal muscles can be involuntary too. If you decide you've got something better to do than listen to this lecture, for example, you stand up to leave. Well, you engage muscles in your legs deliberately, on purpose, right? So you can stand up. That's a voluntary contraction of your muscles. On the other hand, when you're sitting on the examining table in the doctor's office, and he taps just below your knee with his little hammer, and your leg jerks, your knee straightens for a moment. That's an involuntary movement of those same muscles. It's a reflex, an automatic response to a stimulus. Another example is when you leave this lecture hall and walk outside into the bright sunlight, the pupils of your eyes will contract. They'll get smaller, right? Well, those aren't skeletal muscles, of course. They're smooth muscles. Now, some movements involve both voluntary and involuntary muscles. They can involve conscious action on your part, but also muscle movement that you can't control. Take swallowing, for instance. You're not supposed to eat in class, and I'm approaching the row you're sitting in. Quickly, you swallow that last bit of your candy bar so I don't catch you eating in the lecture hall. Now, this is a voluntary swallow. But if you're at the dentist, you can also do the opposite. Try to stop yourself from swallowing when your mouth is wide open, and the dental assistant's got that little mirror in there, and she's cleaning your teeth. After, say, 30 seconds or so, you just have to swallow, right? You can't help it. That's because the swallowing process, though you can start it with movements of your voluntary muscles, is taken over by involuntary muscles at a certain point. These involuntary muscles sense a buildup of saliva and start doing their job. Or wait, try this. Try to swallow 10 times in a row right now. Go ahead. Well, everyone managed the first swallow and the second, but who made it to 5? It gets harder and harder, doesn't it? You want to swallow, but you can't make yourself swallow again and again.
Now get ready to answer the questions. You may use your notes to help you answer. Number 1. What is the talk mainly about? Number 3. How does the professor clarify his point about movements that are a mixture of voluntary and involuntary actions? Number 4. In the lecture, the professor describes 3 different types of muscles. Indicate to which category each of the following belongs. Number 5. What kind of muscle do people have conscious control over? Listen to part of a conversation between a student and a professor.
Professor Mackey, do you have a moment?
Why, Maria, hello. Sure, come on in. I'm glad to see you. I haven't had a chance to congratulate you. It's not every first-year student who gets invited to participate in the annual Gregory Art Show.
Well, that's what I wanted to talk with you about.
I had nothing to do with it, Maria. You got it on your own merit, believe me. In fact, I'm not really a favorite of the gallery crowd.
No, well, I didn't know that, but, well, I guess that makes it easier.
Makes what easier?
Well, I think I'm gonna withdraw, or decline the invitation, or...
Why, Maria, it's a wonderful opportunity. I have a class of graduate students who would give anything for that invitation.
Well, I just got a phone call from them, and, they won't let me hang one of my paintings. So I decided not to do it at all.
What do you mean they won't let you hang one of your paintings?
Well, I submitted 4 paintings from the series I'm working on about stereotypes. You know, where I paint a person that suggests a stereotype, and then somewhere in the painting I put something that works against the stereotype. You know, to get people thinking about assumptions they make about people based on how they look, how they dress.
Yes, it's a great idea. I'm not surprised you stood out in the competition.
Well, they've decided one of my paintings is too controversial, so they won't let me hang it. And I think, well, that's censorship. I don't think it's fair.
Well, well, I can see your point, but, well, they still want you to show your other 3 paintings, right? And those paintings say something about stereotypes, too, don't they?
Well, yes, but still, it's censorship. So you think it's, well, okay to participate anyway?
I can't tell you what to do, Maria.
I was just so mad when they called. I don't know.
Aren't all the paintings in the series controversial in a way? Isn't that part of exposing stereotype thinking?
Well, yeah, true. Maybe it's worth it. I mean, even though they won't let me show one of them, there are 3 others. And they did say I could submit another one for consideration.
I think at some point every serious artist has to decide where to draw the line. It's a personal matter.
Yeah, and it's not always clear-cut, is it? Thanks a lot.
Anytime, Maria.
Now get ready to answer the questions. You may use your notes to help you answer. Number 7. Why does the student go to see her professor? Number 8. According to the professor, what is true about the annual Gregory Art Show? Number 9. Why is the student considering not entering the art show? Listen again to part of the conversation, then answer the question.
Well, I can see your point, but, well, they still want you to show your other 3 paintings, right? And those paintings say something about stereotypes, too, don't they?
Well, yes, but still, it's censorship. So you think it's, well, okay to participate anyway?
I can't tell you what to do, Maria.
Number 10. What is the professor's attitude about the student's participation in the art show? Listen again to part of the conversation, then answer the question.
Well, yeah, true. Maybe it's worth it. I mean, even though they won't let me show one of them, there are 3 others. And they did say I could submit another one for consideration.
I think at some point every serious artist has to decide where to draw the line. It's a personal matter.
Yeah, and it's not always clear-cut, is it? Thanks a lot.
Anytime, Maria.
Number 11. What does the professor mean when he says this?
I think at some point every serious artist has to decide where to draw the line. It's a personal matter.
Number 12. What will the student probably do next? Listen to part of a lecture in a geography class.
Today we're going to move away from our study of deserts to what some would consider their opposites. This would be, of course, forests. What is a forest exactly? The answer depends on your position. If you're standing outside a forest looking at it, you can simply say that it is an area of land covered mostly with trees. This is correct as far as it goes. We have to specify, though, that it is a very large area, not just a patch of land. Forests can extend over millions of square miles. So, we have 2 main criteria for what a forest is, and these are the presence of large amounts of trees and a large amount of territory they cover. This doesn't tell us anything important, though. You can't really know much about the composition of the human body without looking inside it, and the same goes for forests. And a forest is a kind of system, much as the body is. So now we move a bit closer to the forest. The first thing that should be clear is that the specific kinds of trees are becoming identifiable. If we're high in the mountains or somewhere in the north of the country where temperatures are generally colder, we're likely to be seeing mostly evergreen trees like firs and pines. These are coniferous forests. We call it a boreal forest if it's in the far north, or a montane forest if it's at high elevations. Now let's move to a lower, warmer region. Instead of evergreens, we can expect to see perhaps oaks, maples, and hickories, all of which have broad leaves as opposed to needles. Naturally enough, this sort of forest is called a broadleaf forest, also a deciduous forest. Same thing, different name. Maybe it's in a temperate zone, maybe it's in the tropics. It doesn't matter. Of course, not all evergreen forests grow in high or cold regions. If we happen to be on the west coast of North America, for example, we'll be able to see coniferous forests all around, some with extremely huge conifers like sequoias. We'll also see that these forests get a lot of rainfall thanks to moist winds off the Pacific Ocean. They are therefore properly called rainforests, even though they're in a temperate region and not the tropics. People don't normally imagine rainforests being in the United States at all, much less being composed of evergreens. Many forests are mixed, containing both evergreen and deciduous trees. You'll find these forests mostly in areas that are not constantly rainy, but get periodic rainfall all during the year. These are places with no distinct dry or wet seasons. All right, so now we're inside the forest. It doesn't matter what kind it is. First of all, we can see that it's not homogeneous. There are trees of many different species and sizes. We can also see that the forest has 4 vertical layers. In the uppermost layer, there are the tops of the tallest trees in the forest. This highest layer is called the canopy since it overlays everything else. If you're a tree, your greatest goal in life, your standard of success, is to make it into the canopy, where you can get lots of sunlight and photosynthesize with the upper class. The next layer is quite a bit lower from our perspective. It is composed of smaller trees, rarely growing higher than 6 meters tall. Accordingly, it's called the shrub layer, though another name is the understory. The next lowest layer you can find under your feet. This is the leaf litter layer, which is composed of the leaves that have fallen from the trees. Mixed in with these are dead plants and living organisms, including insects and animals. Different sorts of processes go on here as the leaves decay and break down. Brushing back the leaves, we find the lowest and final layer, the dirt layer. The main part of this layer is indeed dirt, which contains nutrients as well as organisms of different kinds. The canopy affects the rest of the forest in various ways. A thick canopy prevents light from reaching the rest of the forest and therefore lowers the overall temperature. It also controls the amount of rainwater that reaches the lower layers. In turn, this allows only certain kinds of plants and shrubs to grow in these layers. In tropical rainforests like those in Costa Rica or Brazil, the most animal diversity is found in the canopy. Many species live only there. This isn't the case in temperate areas. There you can find the most variety of life at the leaf litter and dirt layers. We'll discuss these lower layers in more detail next time.
Now get ready to answer the questions. You may use your notes to help you answer. Number 13. What aspect of forests does the professor mainly discuss? Number 14. How does the professor illustrate the value of an inside look at a forest? Number 15. According to the professor, where are boreal forests most likely to be found? Number 17. According to the professor, which kind of forest is found mostly in areas with periodic year-round rainfall? Listen to part of a lecture in a political science class.
So it seems you can't turn on the news these days without hearing something about establishing a democratic government in one place or another, or debates about whether a democracy is failing. As I'm sure you've noticed, the debates can get pretty heated, and a lot of the time it seems people are talking past each other. It's like they don't even have a common understanding of what they mean when they use the word democracy. Is there really any way to measure, to evaluate a democracy, whether it's healthy or not? We've looked at the ancient Greeks and their ideas about democracy. They meant direct rule. Direct rule. Citizens gathered together in an open meeting, discussed issues, made decisions. The adult male citizens, that is, but not all the people, not women, for instance, which is a pretty big chunk of the people. Well, That's how they did it in Athens in the 5th century BC, but that's not how we do it in the United States in the 21st century. So how can we call ourselves a democracy? Well, we practice something called representative democracy. It's too impractical, too difficult for our entire population to meet together. You can see that for yourself. So here citizens elect people to represent them. Representative democracy. And really, it's just about the only kind we can hope for in today's world when countries are so large and populous, have so many citizens. If we look at these situations that everyone's talking about these days, do we have any way we can judge whether a country is a democracy or on its way to becoming one? Well, yes, we do. There are, in fact, 3 attributes, 3 basic characteristics of a democracy that are so important, so fundamental, that without one, well, and they're so interrelated, that if a government is missing one of the 3, or if one of them isn't functioning, then you'd have to say that country isn't meeting the standards of a democracy. What are they? 3 attributes. 1. Popular sovereignty. 2. Political equality. And 3. Political liberty. Let's look at them one at a time. Popular sovereignty, that's the idea that the government does what the people want it to do. Pretty simple. If government policies are in line with its citizens' wishes, and to know that, we've got to have the people participating in the political life of their country. For them to do that, they've got to be informed. They've got to have access to good information, and there's got to be healthy debate about policies. And then, ultimately, the majority rules. After all, the debate and information gathering, when a majority of the citizens agree on something and express it through the political process, and the government carries out that decision, well, then you've got popular sovereignty. You can probably guess how the second principle, political equality, how it fits into the equation. Political equality means that each person has one vote and only one vote, no more, no less. When it comes to making a decision, each person has the same power. All the people are equal when it comes to determining the popular will. Of course, I can just hear some of you saying, but what about money? Well, I have to save that for another discussion, but for now, let me tell you that, in fact, that is a debate about democracy. Does it require material equality? Can you have people with wildly different incomes and wealth and still have a democracy? You'll hear arguments both ways. It's something to think about. On to the third element, political liberty. These are those freedoms we know from our Bill of Rights. Freedom of press, freedom of speech, freedom of assembly, freedom of thought. And you can understand how these are related to the other 2 elements. For instance, without a free press, you're not going to have the quality information you need to make up your mind about some policy. If you can't meet, how can you discuss issues? How can you have a chance to persuade someone that your new idea is better than the old way of doing things? So, what you had in the countries of Eastern Europe back in the 90s, for instance, was a demand not just to elect representatives, but they wanted all the other things. They wanted the political freedoms that would make those elections meaningful. So, we can look at any country through the lens of these 3 attributes, and by seeing to what extent each principle exists in the country, we can get a pretty good idea of the state of its democracy.
Now get ready to answer the questions. You may use your notes to help you answer. Number 1. What aspect of democracy does the professor mainly discuss? Listen again to part of the lecture, then answer the question.
We've looked at the ancient Greeks and their ideas about democracy. They meant direct rule. Direct rule. Citizens gathered together in an open meeting, discussed issues, made decisions. The adult male citizens, that is, but not all the people, not women, for instance, which is a pretty big chunk of the people.
Number 2. What is the professor's attitude towards democracy in ancient Athens? Number 4. Why does the professor mention the Bill of Rights? Listen again to part of the lecture, then answer the question.
You can probably guess how the second principle, political equality, how it fits into the equation. Political equality means that each person has one vote and only one vote, no more, no less. When it comes to making a decision, each person has the same power. All the people are equal when it comes to determining the popular will. Of course, I can just hear some of you saying, but what about money? Well, I have to save that for another discussion, but for now, let me tell you that, in fact, that is a debate about democracy. Does it require material equality? Can you have people with wildly different incomes and wealth and still have a democracy? You'll hear arguments both ways. It's something to think about.
Number 5. Why does the professor say this?
You'll hear arguments both ways. It's something to think about.
Listen to part of a conversation in the university's campus parking office.
Good morning. Can I help you?
Yes, I hope I'm in the right place. I'm here to apply for a handicapped parking pass.
Yes, we issue permits. Your name, please?
Joe Schmidt.
Okay, Mr. Schmidt. Let me check the computer. I can't find anything in here. SCHMIDT, right?
Yes. I am registered. I should be in there.
Maybe not. This isn't a database of registered students. This is information we get from the Health Services Clinic. If you were there recently and the doctor has determined that you aren't able to walk long distances, then he tags a file for us.
Oh no, it's not for me. I mean, I need the handicap pass, but I'm not the one who can't walk. It's my roommate. He broke his ankle playing volleyball and will be in a cast for maybe 6 weeks.
What's his name?
Arnie Schwartz.
SCH... Oh, yes, here it is. Dr. Harvey has sent us the notice. But I can't really give you a permit that's been allocated to Mr. Schwartz. He should come in and fill out an application.
But he doesn't have a car. I do.
So why do you need his permit on your car?
Well, I'll probably drive him to class a lot, if we can park close enough.
Does he know you're trying to get his handicapped permit?
Yeah, he asked me to. It's not easy for him to get around. That's why he's not here himself.
I understand, but...
What if he signs something, like a permission slip or something?
I was just going to suggest that you take this application form back to him. Have him sign it and write down the license plate number of your car. I mean, though technically it should be his, I suppose it doesn't really matter who owns the car.
So he wouldn't have to come in?
Normally I would have to check an ID before issuing a permit, but I guess his signature would be enough.
And then what? Bring the form back here?
Right, and then I'll print up an 8-week permit for you.
Couldn't you just call him and get his permission?
Sorry, I have to have his signature.
Okay, I guess I'll have to come back. Thank you.
Now get ready to answer the questions. You may use your notes to help you answer. Number 7. Why is the student in the campus parking office? Number 8. Why does the man have difficulty getting what he wants? Number 9. What information is in the office's database? Listen again to part of the conversation. Then answer the question.
So why do you need his permit on your car?
Well, I'll probably drive him to class a lot, if we can park close enough.
Does he know you're trying to get his handicapped permit?
Yeah, he asked me to. It's not easy for him to get around. That's why he's not here himself.
Number 10. Why does the woman ask the man these questions?
So why do you need his permit on your car? Does he know you're trying to get his handicapped permit?
Listen again to part of the conversation. Then answer the question.
Have him sign it and write down the license plate number of your car. I mean, though technically it should be his, I suppose it doesn't really matter who owns the car.
So he wouldn't have to come in?
Number 11. How does the woman feel about registering the handicap permit for the man's car? Listen to part of a lecture in a business class.
I think most of you at one time or another have eaten at a McDonald's fast food place. In certain ways, McDonald's as a company is actually representative of some important trends in modern American life. It should come as no surprise that these trends are controversial. In fact, some people refer to them collectively as McDonaldization. To begin with, let's look at how McDonald's is operated. The main principle is efficiency. This means that all tasks are performed with as little waste of time or energy as possible. Even when it was just starting out, the company's service goal was to serve a hamburger, fries, and a milkshake to a customer in exactly, 50 seconds. Though this strict time limit is no longer followed, speed is still the single most important quality of McDonald's. The focus on efficiency can be seen in every other aspect of McDonald's service. Customers take care of picking up their own meals as well as cleaning, which is easy since all food comes in disposable materials. There's no need for the restaurant workers to waste time collecting or washing plates and utensils. All that's necessary is to take out the trash. Even the food itself is efficient. For example, the Egg McMuffin has most of the components of a regular breakfast in one convenient sandwich. In order for an organization to be efficient, several operational requirements must be met. One of these is calculability. Every amount of every resource, whether paper, cooking oil, or the amount of meat in a hamburger, as well as the burger's size, are known precisely. Even the length and width of a single French fry have exact, uniform measurements. This allows all food served by McDonald's to adhere to a common standard. It also helps the company to accurately predict the amounts of money it needs to spend for supplies. If the exact quantities of everything to be served are known, then it is far easier to plan the company's operations. Another requirement, which is partly a result of calculability, is predictability. This aspect of McDonald's is very obvious. It doesn't matter whether the restaurant is in Russia or Texas. The ingredients and preparation methods of McDonald's food are almost completely the same. This is certainly intentional, but it would happen anyway given the system that McDonald's uses. When resources and time are allocated rationally, when as little as possible is left to chance, the result is a highly uniform product. I hope you can see here that the system underlying McDonald's is one that tries to control the movements of its resources as much as possible. What cannot be predictably controlled, though, are the actual people working for the company. Humans don't really seem suited for doing things the same way again and again, and their performance can change according to their momentary moods or attitudes. It's possible, therefore, to say then that humans are the least efficient part of a rational system. In order to reduce this unpredictability, McDonald's has automated the production of its food as much as possible. For instance, temperature and time cannot be adjusted on cooking equipment. All that's necessary is to turn it on. It turns off automatically. Now we've identified 4 characteristics of the McDonald's approach. These are efficiency, calculability, predictability, and automation. As principles of business, they've allowed McDonald's to become very successful. But at the same time, they've also come to characterize much of American life. We can see the emphasis on efficiency all around us. Everything, it seems, should be done quickly without any seemingly unnecessary additions to the process. So much so that it seems difficult to think that something that's efficient is not also good. Also, consider the standardization of so many things in our lives. In fact, Americans tend to distrust products that don't appear standardized. Not only all the mass-produced things we use or eat, but also the things we do, from sharply delineated work hours to strictly arranged vacation packages, from buying groceries to shopping at the mall, the elements of which are all precisely calculated. In turn, as our experiences become more uniform, they also become more predictable. And we see more automation and less contact with actual people. This is what I mean by McDonaldization.
Now get ready to answer the questions. You may use your notes to help you answer. Number 14. What reason is given for McDonald's business methods? Number 15. According to the professor, what are some ways in which McDonaldization can be seen in American life? Choose two answers. Number 16. How does the professor develop the topic of McDonaldization? Listen again to part of the lecture, then answer the question.
This means that all tasks are performed with as little waste of time or energy as possible. Even when it was just starting out, the company's service goal was to serve a hamburger, fries, and a milkshake to a customer in exactly, 50 seconds.
Number 17. Why does the professor say this?
The company's service goal was to serve a hamburger, fries, and a milkshake to a customer in exactly, 50 seconds.
Listen again to part of the lecture, then answer the question.
In turn, as our experiences become more uniform, they also become more predictable. And we see more automation and less contact with actual people. This is what I mean by McDonaldization.
Number 18. What is the professor's attitude towards McDonaldization? Speaking section. Describe your favorite day of the week and explain why you like it. Include details and examples to support your explanation. Some restaurants insist that patrons turn off their cell phones while dining. Other restaurants have no rules regarding cell phones. Which policy do you think is better and why? State University has decided that unpaid internships will no longer fulfill the requirement for graduation. Read the announcement about the decision from the president of State University. You will have 45 seconds to read the announcement. Begin reading now. The man expresses his opinion of the announcement by the university president. State his opinion and explain the reasons he gives for holding that opinion. Now read a passage about water quality. You have 45 seconds to read the passage. Begin reading now. Now listen to part of a lecture on this topic.
So one aspect of water quality in the home is whether the water is hard or soft. Many homes use water softeners to remove the dissolved calcium and magnesium found in hard water. That is, after all, the definition of hard water, isn't it? But, why bother turning hard water into soft water? Why do people prefer soft water? Well, it turns out there are two main objections to hard water in the home. One, it doesn't react well with soap. Hard water and soap cause rings in the bathtub, and clothes washed in hard water develop a grayish look. What else? Well, hard water leaves mineral deposits in plumbing, which can cause problems. Burning out the electrical elements in a hot water heater, for instance. Ruining coffee pots. So most people use water softeners to avoid these problems if they have a hard water supply. But here's something to consider. Several studies have shown that there is an inverse relationship between the hardness of public water supplies and the incidence of heart disease. That is, the harder the water, the less heart disease. Although the reasons for this relationship are not understood, it's been observed worldwide. Maybe hard water is actually better for us.
The professor describes the effects of the household use of hard water. Explain how this is related to water quality. Now listen to a conversation between two students.
Hey, Dylan, do you have a moment? I'd like to ask your opinion on something.
Hey, hi Annie. How's it going? Sure. I've got half an hour before my next class, and you know me, I love to give advice.
I sure could use some. I'm having a hard time figuring out which of two classes I should take next semester. Have you ever taken a course with Ms. Washington?
I sure have, and my advice is avoid her like the plague.
That's what everyone says.
With good reason. She'll bore you to death. She couldn't make a topic interesting if her life depended on it. She's got this monotonous voice. Just dull, dull, dull. Find a different class.
Well, there is another class I'm considering, taught by Ms. Aparicio.
Night and day. Aparicio's dynamite. Whatever it is, take it.
Yeah, I had a class from her last year and she was great. But her class next semester, well, I couldn't care less about the topic. I'd be bored to tears, I'm sure. And Washington is teaching a course I'm really interested in.
And you don't need either one for your major?
No, they're both electives. I mean, I need the credits, but any course in my major will do. These are the two that fit in best with the other courses I have to take.
So it comes down to, do you take a course that doesn't interest you at all but is being taught by one of the best teachers on campus? Or do you take a course from a lousy teacher because you have a passion for the subject?
Yeah, that about sums it up. What would you do?
I'd probably go with Aparicio's class. You can always do reading on the other topic on your own.
I thought of that, but I don't really have the time.
You know, you might discover that Aparicio can get you interested in her subject. Maybe you'll discover that it's not boring at all.
I guess that's a possibility, too. It'd be such an easy decision if Aparicio were teaching Washington's course.
The students discuss two possible solutions to the woman's problem. Describe the problem, then state which of the two solutions you prefer and explain why. Now listen to part of a talk in a biology class.
One of the wonderful automatic mechanisms of the human body is its tendency to self-regulate, that is, to keep things like its body temperature, and levels of oxygen in the blood, that kind of thing, to keep them within certain acceptable ranges. This self-regulation, this ability, this tendency of the body to keep body variables within a certain range, we call that homeostasis. Regulating body temperature is probably the biological process, the homeostatic process we're most familiar with or aware of. In fact, you can think of homeostasis, the way it works, as acting like the body's thermostat. Just like in your house or apartment, there is a thermostat that regulates the heating and cooling systems. It maintains a constant or near constant temperature in the room. The more sophisticated thermostats these days let you set a range of temperatures for given time periods. If the temperature in the room falls below that range, the heat goes on. If it rises above that range, air conditioning turns on. Homeostasis in humans works in a similar way. If the body falls below a certain temperature, for humans and most other mammals, it's right around 37 degrees centigrade. Well, then the body will start generating heat to raise the body temperature. It starts shivering, which is simply rhythmic muscle contractions that help generate heat. Jumping up and down or running around accomplishes the same thing. Or if the body gets too hot, it will, well, the human body at least, will start sweating to reduce the body temperature. Or we stop moving around. We complain that it's too hot to do anything. In fact, we're right. Reducing activity helps lower body temperature. So homeostasis involves biological processes that work to maintain body variables within a fixed range.
Writing section. Now listen to part of a lecture on the topic you just read about.
Arthur Evans's discovery of the palace at Knossos is one of the great events in archaeology. It brought to light a culture and history that had been just dimly guessed at before, and showed how myth could have some bearing on reality, even when separated by many centuries. Evans will always be remembered for this, which is the way it should be. However, while we should always give credit to Evans for his discovery, we should remember that his own interpretations of them were, seriously flawed. Because of this, most of the really important work on ancient Crete was done by his contemporaries and successors. Probably the best example is Michael Ventress's deciphering of the Linear B alphabet, which Evans had found on tablets at Knossos. As you know, Evans himself wasn't ever able to figure it out. Linear B turned out to be something totally different from what Evans had thought. It was actually a script for writing Greek, not some unknown Cretan language. This alone wouldn't have hurt Evans's theories much, since the tablet could simply have been imported from Greece. However, other archaeologists had found tablets written in Linear B on the mainland. When Linear B was found to be Greek, this showed there had indeed been a transference of culture, but not the one Evans thought. Instead of the advanced and powerful Cretans bringing writing to the weaker Greeks, those Greeks had brought their own language in their own writing to Crete. The clear implication was that Crete had actually been conquered by the mainland Greeks at one time. Evans's notion of the Cretans as possessing a more developed and powerful society could no longer be sustained.
Summarize the points in the lecture you just heard, explaining how they cast doubt on Evans' findings and theory.
Practice Test 4.
Listening section. Listen to part of a lecture in a biology class.
So today we're going to spend the first part of class talking about Wallachia, a very unique zoogeographic region. You may have noticed that your textbook mentions zoogeographic regions. These are areas of distinctive animal life or fauna. The book discusses the examples of the Neotropical and Ethiopian regions, among others. All of these zoogeographic regions are characterized by having a diversity of species that make up a giant gene pool. You may remember from our last class that a gene pool refers to the total genetic material available for a population or species at a given time. The bigger the gene pool for a species, the more genetic material available for that species to evolve and adapt to their environment. And out of this gene pool and the forces of natural selection, we see the evolution of a variety of related species. These species have evolved in relationship to each other, but are different from species in other zoogeographic regions. Move to a different region, and the gene pool, the diversity of species living there, well, that gene pool would be different. Now, Wallachia is such a zoogeographic region, and especially interesting for the huge diversity in a relatively small area. It's located between the Moluccan Islands of Indonesia and the continental shelf of Australia, and it covers a total land area of 347,000 kilometers squared. It's named after Alfred Russel Wallace, the father of animal geography, and whose other claim to fame is that he was developing the theory of evolution at the same time as Charles Darwin. However, Darwin was a little more established and managed to publish it first. The moral of this story, publish or perish. Right, well, back to our point, Wallachia. Okay, so Alfred Russel Wallace spent a lot of time traveling the East Indies, or what is today called Indonesia, where he was studying the biology of the region. Aside from this being a part of the world that is rich in biological diversity, both animal and plant life on land, terrestrial as well as marine life. See, what was unusual to this pioneering biologist, and this is important, what was unusual was the sudden difference in species. Wallace was sailing between the islands of Bali and Lombok, a distance of merely 15 miles, when he discovered a significant and drastic change between the bird families living on the two islands. On the one hand, there were Asian bird species found on Bali, yet just a short distance away on Lombok he found no Asian birds. What he found, on the other hand, were several distinctly Australian species. It was as if there was a line, and not a very thick one, that the birds refused to cross. But it was not only birds. Take mammals, for instance. East of the line, there are placental mammals such as tigers, rhinoceros, and apes, similar to those of the Asian mainland. In contrast to the west, he found marsupials. Now these marsupials are distinct from placental mammals in that female marsupials typically have a pouch in which they rear their young. Well, true explorer and scientist that he was, Wallace was not content to study the birds of Bali and Lombok, but sailed to nearby islands in the East Indies. He marked the channel between the two islands of Bali and Lombok and followed it north, observing species on other islands and discovering what was in fact a distinctive line between zoogeographic regions. What he discovered has been called the Wallace Line in his honor, a dividing line between the species of two large zoogeographic provinces, those of Asia and Australia. In his enthusiasm, Wallace may have exaggerated the distinctness of this line. Other biologists have since adjusted the boundary between the Asian and the Australian regions, as with other zoogeographic regions. Now, this is important. The core areas of a region, their centers, are most distinct, and as you go out from the center, it's fuzzier on the periphery, the edges. We now know that some Asian species have crossed the Wallace Line. These may not be the birds of Bali or the Asian mammals, but other species such as insects. What we see along the line is more of a blending of species as one zoogeographic region meets another. Moving westward from the Wallace Line, there is a gradual reduction in Asian species and an increase in Australian species. So, this area, this transition region between the Asian and Australian regions, well, it has subsequently been named Wallacea, a particularly interesting zoogeographic transitional region.
Now get ready to answer the questions. You may use your notes to help you answer.
Number 2. What is the significance of the Wallace Line? Number 4. According to the lecture, which of the following statements about Wallacea are true? Number 5. According to the professor, what is the relationship between a gene pool and a zoogeographic region?
Listen again to part of the lecture, then answer the question.
What he discovered has been called the Wallace Line in his honor, a dividing line between the species of two large zoogeographic provinces, those of Asia and Australia. In his enthusiasm, Wallace may have exaggerated the distinctness of this line. Number 6. Why does the professor say this? In his enthusiasm, Wallace may have exaggerated the distinctness of this line.
Listen to part of a conversation between a student and a clerk at the student union.
I'd like to buy some tickets, please.
Okay, but if it's for the Phobos Quartet tomorrow, you're too late. That performance is already sold out.
No, it's not for that. I want 5 tickets to the game next weekend.
Football tickets! I'm sorry, but the student union doesn't sell tickets for football games or any other sporting events. You'll have to go to the athletic office for that. Do you know where it is?
Yes, thanks. Sorry about the mistake. I guess I'll go over there now.
Before you go, can I ask you something?
Sure.
Is this the first time you've bought tickets for an athletic event?
Yes, it is. Why?
Well, I can probably save you some time. First of all, you can't buy more than 1 student ticket for an athletic event. Every student is limited to 1. You only pay half price for it, though.
Why is that? I wanted to bring the rest of my family to the game. How are they supposed to go?
Well, student tickets are limited to 1 each, but your family can always buy general admission tickets if any are available.
So I can't get a discount for them?
No, unfortunately not. Student tickets only, and a certain number of seats for each game are reserved just for students. You can imagine what would happen otherwise. No one would ever buy a full-price ticket and students would get squeezed out of the games.
What if some of my friends who don't plan on going to the game give their tickets to my family? You know, my family uses their tickets.
Yes, you could probably do that, but your friends would have to actually go to the ticket office, show ID, and buy their tickets personally.
Okay, but would someone at the stadium say to my dad, "Hey, this is a student ticket and you don't look like a student"?
I'm not really sure. I suppose that's possible. You just have to decide whether you want to take that chance.
Yeah, I'll have to think about that.
But I don't want to give you wrong information. Maybe there wouldn't be a problem. You'd really better check it out with the athletic ticket office. I don't know all their rules. If you're embarrassed to do it in person, give them a call. Their extension is 53010.
53010? I'll do that. Thanks for all your help.
Now get ready to answer the questions. You may use your notes to help you answer. Number 10. Which of the following is one of the student's worries? Listen again to part of the conversation. Then answer the question.
Before you go, can I ask you something?
Sure.
Is this the first time you've bought tickets for an athletic event?
Yes, it is. Why?
Well, I can probably save you some time. First of all, you can't buy more than one student ticket for an athletic event. Every student is limited to one. You only pay half price for it, though.
Number 11. Why does the woman ask the man this?
Is this the first time you've bought tickets for an athletic event?
Listen again to part of the conversation. Then answer the question.
Yeah, I'll have to think about that.
But I don't want to give you wrong information. Maybe there wouldn't be a problem. You'd really better check it out with the athletic ticket office. I don't know all their rules. If you're embarrassed to do it in person, give them a call. Their extension is 53010.
53010? I'll do that. Thanks for all your help.
Number 12. What does the woman think about the information she has given the student? Listen to part of a talk in a film class.
Okay, so we've watched a couple of great films. Well, I think they're great films, and most critics agree. The Big Sleep, Citizen Kane, of course, The Maltese Falcon, and today I'd like to talk a bit about, the genre, the style of filmmaking. These films are part of the film noir tradition. Film noir, what does it mean? Any, French speakers here?
Literally black film, but, noir can also be translated as dark, so, dark film?
Yes, dark film, film noir. So, why do you suppose the genre is called that?
Well, the films are all shot in black and white.
That's true, at least for the classics of the genre. It started in the 1940s and peaked in the 1950s, but some films from the 1970s, Coppola's The Godfather, for example, and later, too, have some noir elements, even though they're shot in color. But yes, being shot in black and white is one of the elements of the genre. Still, this question of its name.
Their plots are kinda gloomy, kinda dark, you know, not light-hearted at all. I mean, there may be some humor, especially Bogart, for instance, in The Big Sleep, trading quips with Bacall, but the overall mood isn't very upbeat. It's pretty somber, depressing, even cynical, I think.
Very good. And, well, that pretty much reflected the America of the post-World War II era. People were pessimistic. They didn't expect things to turn out well. There had been the Great Depression in the 1930s, World War II in the 1940s, and, well, the nuclear bomb might have won the war for the Allies. But, there's no denying that it also unleashed an era of fear, even hopelessness, the possibility of nuclear war. Anyway, we can debate the reasons behind the mood of these movies, but there's no denying that the mood was pretty dark. There's another reason for the term film noir, though. It's actually what caused French critics to call the films noir in the first place.
The lighting? It's pretty stark, full of contrast and also lots of shadows.
Yes, lighting effects, the use of those shadows, low-light scenes. There are some iconic film noir scenes, the dark hotel room or apartment at night, and through the window there's the blinking neon sign of a diner or a bar, rain-drenched streets that give off wonderful reflections of headlights, or the flashing neon signs again.
And there's always the shot of cigarette smoke kind of drifting in and out of the light.
Yes, lighting is a real hallmark of film noir. Another characteristic is what's called the omniscient narrator. Omniscient. That means all-knowing. People speak of a god as being omniscient. He knows everything that happened and everything that's going to happen. In the same way, the narrator of the film noir knows all about the story he's telling. And he explains some of the plot sometimes, or gives you his viewpoint, often cynical, like we said. A lot of times, the narrator is the main character in the story. There's another narrative device that's used a lot in film noir. That's the flashback, using flashbacks to tell the story. Think of Citizen Kane. It opens up with the ending, with the death of the main character. And then the rest of the film tells what happened, how he got to that point. Let's talk a bit about the main characters. The noir hero, Humphrey Bogart, is probably the most well-known noir actor. I mentioned The Maltese Falcon and The Big Sleep. In both of them, he plays a private detective, typical character. That's because most of the genre is crime films, so a detective is a natural. The hero certainly has his flaws. He's not as moral as we might expect a hero to be. In fact, his morals are kind of vague, his ethics too. He isn't motivated by any noble idea of humanity or anything like that. In fact, he can be pretty cynical, paranoid sometimes, fatalistic. He can't control what's going on, and alienated from society, feeling like he doesn't fit in. And the women are interesting too. Attractive, they often rely on their sexual attractiveness to manipulate the male character into doing something that in the end is going to be his downfall, hers too. But still, these women, we have some sympathy for them too, because their situations are usually pretty bleak, locked in loveless marriages or victims of abuse. We can understand what's motivating their need for revenge, and we can see that it can't end well.
Now get ready to answer the questions. You may use your notes to help you answer. Number 15. Which characteristics are true of film noir? Number 16. Which statement best expresses the professor's attitude toward the mood of film noir? Number 17. According to the talk, the narrator in a noir film is likely to be Listen again to part of the talk, then answer the question.
Okay, so we've watched a couple of great films. Well, I think they're great films, and most critics agree. The Big Sleep, Citizen Kane, of course, The Maltese Falcon, and today I'd like to talk a bit about, the genre, the style of filmmaking. These films are part of the film noir tradition. Film noir, what does it mean? Any, French speakers here?
Number 18. Why does the professor ask this?
Any, French speakers here?
Listen to part of a discussion in a sociology class.
Today, we're going to discuss Max Weber's theoretical categories of social action. I hope that you had a chance to look over the reading. So, in formulating his approach to sociology, Weber was responding to the ideas of his time. He was not interested in structural forces or natural laws explaining human societies. Instead, he was interested in the subjective meanings human actors attach to their actions. According to Weber, everything that we can observe people doing socially, they do with a purpose in mind. In other words, all action is intentional, and it is directed toward other people. And this is why the sociologist must consider the social context in which people act. There is an exception, though, and that is the person who is insane and thus behaving without a socially understood purpose. For now, I want to be clear that Weber's approach differs from classical economic models of human behavior that narrowly define rational behavior as using the most rational means to obtain one's self-interest, particularly material self-interest. It's not that Weber was uninterested in economics, quite the opposite. He was trained in economic history, but he saw things a little differently, and the way he spelled this out was through distinguishing different types of purposeful social action. Can anyone recall how Weber characterized the different types of social action?
Well, he did talk about people being goal-oriented, the way they use means to achieve ends.
Okay, you're touching on his idea of purposeful rational action, or goal-oriented action, as you say. And yes, he is referring to the rational choices of means and ends. This type of social action is closest to the standard economic view of the self-interested individual. A good example is the engineer who builds a bridge by rationally choosing the most efficient means possible to achieve his goal of building the bridge. He aims to build the strongest bridge at the lowest cost in the shortest period of time. That's an example of purposeful rationality. Yet, Weber observed there are other forms of social action, all equally meaningful to the actor, and important to the sociologist. Take value-oriented rationality for an example.
That would be like the monk that he talked about, the one who would live a very simple life in the woods to obtain salvation.
Right, and didn't Weber say that he also used rational means to attain his goal of holiness, but that the goal wasn't necessarily rational? I mean, not everyone believes in holiness. That's a religious idea that's not necessarily shared by all people.
Very good. The monk is an excellent example of value rationality because he is striving for a goal which in itself may not be rational, but which is pursued through rational means within an ethical, religious, or other moral context. The rational means are self-denial, in his case eating simple food and living a very modest life, and he does this because he believes these actions will help him attain his goal of holiness, a goal that is shared by his religious community and perhaps some members of the broader society. So now, Weber had a third type of social action as well, which he called affective action, affect being another word for emotion. Okay, then affective action refers to social action anchored in emotions rather than the rational weighing of means and ends.
Sounds like my roommate. She only decided to go to this university because her boyfriend went here. She's like, so in love.
Okay. Her decision was emotionally meaningful to her, and thus purposeful. Moving on then, what about the final type, traditional action?
I think Weber said traditional action was guided by the past. An individual will look to what she sees as traditional, and that's the way she will try to do things.
Can you think of an example?
Well, I guess I did that, when I chose to go to this college. My dad, my uncles, my mom, lots of their friends, well, they all went here. And, well, I think it was expected that I would go to school here, too. It's a good school and all, but I never really looked at other options.
In Weber's eyes, that could be traditional action, so we can see that practicing Weber's sociology is not as clear-cut as simply studying society as if all people were making rational decisions all the time.
Now get ready to answer the questions. You may use your notes to help you answer. Number 2. Which of the following is a characteristic of classical economic rationality? Number 3. Why do the students talk about the monk? Listen again to part of the discussion, then answer the question.
So now, Weber had a third type of social action as well, which he called affective action, affect being another word for emotion.
Number 5. Why does the professor say this?
Affect being another word for emotion.
Listen to part of a conversation between a student and a university advisor.
Hello, welcome to the Student Assistance Center. How can I help you?
I'm sort of anxious about how this semester is going to turn out. The last one was really hard for me.
I don't think you have to worry so much. It's only the first day after all.
The truth is, one of the requirements for my major is Chinese, but I'm having a lot of trouble learning it. I almost failed my Chinese class last term. I really don't want to have to switch majors.
Have you ever thought about studying in a different way? Your problems might just be caused by your study habits more than anything else.
I asked my professor about that last semester. I tried out the things that she recommended, but it didn't help. I don't think I'm talented at learning languages.
You could try the language lab. They've added Chinese to their program this semester.
What do you mean? I didn't know there was anything like that here.
Well, it used to be just a room with tape players and headphones, and they only had French, German, and Spanish. It has really been improved a lot.
How do you think it could help me?
The main thing is that it's a good place to practice outside of class. When you're learning a language, you need all the practice you can get.
Okay, but I know I'm not very diligent by myself. I need something to stimulate me to work harder, or something to make practicing easier.
I think you won't have a problem with that. There are 25 computers there now, and they're specialized for language learning. You can practice a lot of things that would be really difficult otherwise, like pronunciation. You can record your own voice speaking Chinese or whatever, and then compare it to an audio file of a native speaker saying the same thing. There are many other kinds of programs as well. You can even get writing assistance.
That sounds pretty good, but I don't really like working alone all that much. I'd like to practice with other people too.
You can do that. The computers are networked, so you can work with other people at the language lab. You can do this in pairs or groups. The programs can be used by several people at the same time, so you can work on assignments together.
Do you know if any professors will use this for their classes?
Actually, as far as I know, all language classes will use the lab during this semester. At least you'll be able to do your homework online. Oh yeah, there's also an archive of foreign media. You can watch movies and TV programs at the terminals.
Maybe there's hope for me this semester after all.
Now get ready to answer the questions. You may use your notes to help you answer. Number 7. Why does the student go to talk to her advisor? Number 9. What does the woman say about herself? Number 10. According to the advisor, which of the following are features of the new language lab? Number 11. What is the woman's attitude towards using computers to study? Listen again to part of the conversation, then answer the question.
How do you think it could help me?
The main thing is that it's a good place to practice outside of class. When you're learning a language, you need all the practice you can get.
Okay, but I know I'm not very diligent by myself. I need something to stimulate me to work harder, or something to make practicing easier.
Number 12. Why does the advisor say this?
When you're learning a language, you need all the practice you can get.
Listen to part of a talk in a physical science class.
For the next week or so, we're going to be looking at so-called environmentally friendly technology, a technology that pollutes less, does less harm, even no harm if it's possible, to the environment. An obvious place to start might be with the biggest polluters, industrial processes, or automobiles. But instead, I'm going to start with the microcosm, with something small that I think each one of us has in our homes to one degree or another. I'm going to start with the personal, with our own lives. Devices with standby power. What is standby power? Also called standby mode. It's a feature offered by many appliances and electronic devices today. We turn the television off, but it's not really off. or not completely off. It's in standby mode so that we can pick up the remote control and switch it back on whenever we want. Well, to read that remote control, some part of the TV's electronics has still got to be on, always looking for that remote signal, standing by to receive that message and turn itself on. Think of all the devices you've got in your home that have some kind of standby mode: televisions, DVD players, stereos, computers. Do you have a coffee maker or a microwave oven with a built-in digital clock? That's consuming electricity, even when you're not making a fresh cup of coffee or reheating your morning coffee.
Yeah, but big deal. They couldn't possibly be using much energy.
Would you be surprised if I told you that a typical microwave oven uses more electricity powering that clock than it uses heating food?
Yeah, come on. It's got to take a lot more power to heat food than run a digital clock.
Sure, at any given moment. If you're heating food in the microwave, it actually takes 100 times as much power to heat the food as to run the clock. But most of the time, your microwave isn't heating food. In fact, most microwaves are on standby for more than 99% of the time.
But does it really add up to much?
There was a study done almost 10 years ago that suggested that 5% of all household electrical use, 5% was consumed by devices in standby mode. But a team of scientists from the Lawrence Berkeley National Laboratory, I mention their employer just to give you a sense of how reputable these scientists are. They researched the actual standby power use. And in fact, they found the actual use approached 10% of electricity consumption by households. And a French study in the same year, 2000, reported that the figure in France was 7%. There have been other studies in other developed countries, and some have even found standby power consumption in residences to be as high as 13%.
You're right then. That could be a significant savings.
Who's going to give up the convenience?
Well, there are ways to make standby power consumption more efficient. Some electronic devices use more than 20 watts of power in standby mode, and yet the technology exists to enable standby modes to consume around 1 watt of power, even less. The problem, of course, is persuading manufacturers to install them.
The government should make it mandatory that they use more efficient standby modes.
Why jump to such an extreme solution? What about that Energy Star program? You know, when you buy something that uses electricity, a refrigerator, a television, a computer. Some of them have that Energy Star logo on them. It means the product complies with standards for energy efficiency. I think it's international, not just the US. They could create some standards for the standby mode feature.
Yeah, but it's voluntary, right? Industry won't change unless it's forced to.
If the environment is so important to consumers, then they'll buy items that are more energy efficient. The market will take care of it.
Come on, until today's class, I never knew about the problem. When the government sees a problem like this that they can easily handle with a regulation, they should do it.
Government laying down these kinds of laws just gets in the way of industry doing what it does best, which is innovation. And also it means consumers lose some freedom. We don't have as much choice.
Well, California introduced some legislation in 2004 that sets standards for energy consumption of standby modes. Already, it's illegal to sell a television or DVD player in California that uses more than 3 watts of power in standby mode. One of the Berkeley scientists has declared that if these household gadgets use the most efficient means of powering their standby modes, that the developed nations could reduce carbon dioxide emissions by nearly 0.5%. That's the equivalent of removing more than 18 million cars from the roads.
Or you could just unplug your appliances when you're not using them.
Now get ready to answer the questions. You may use your notes to help you answer. Number 13. What is the talk mostly about? Number 15. Which statement best describes the Energy Star program? Listen again to part of the talk, then answer the question.
Yeah, but big deal. They couldn't possibly be using much energy.
Would you be surprised if I told you that a typical microwave oven uses more electricity powering that clock than it uses heating food?
Number 17. Why does the professor ask the student this?
Would you be surprised if I told you that a typical microwave oven uses more electricity powering that clock than it uses heating food?
Speaking section. What characteristic do you most value in a friend? Use reasons and specific examples to explain your choice. Some people spend their entire lives in one place. Others move a number of times in their lives looking for a better job, house, community, or even climate. Which do you prefer? Staying in one place or moving around a lot? Use reasons and specific examples to support your opinion. Southern State University is adapting a new policy about selling alcohol at athletic events. Read the announcement about the new policy. You will have 45 seconds to read the response. Begin reading now. Now listen to two students as they discuss the announcement.
Have you heard about the new school drinking policy?
No. What about it?
The administration is banning all alcohol sales at the university. They won't even sell beer at football games or any other sports.
What? That's terrible. How could they do something like that?
They said they wanted to stop students from drinking too much. It's irritating, but maybe it's the right thing to do.
I don't think so at all. Look, students may be young, but they're still responsible for their own actions. The university is supposed to teach them, not to decide what they do in their private lives. It's not the school's job to improve students' morals, even if they need improving.
But they weren't forbidding students to drink. They only said they wouldn't allow beer or wine to be sold on campus. That's not really oppressive, is it?
That's not the point. Students have the right to make choices, even if those choices are bad. They shouldn't be trying to influence us, even if they don't like what we do.
The woman expresses her opinion of the announcement. State her opinion and explain the reasons she gives for holding that opinion. Now listen to part of a lecture on this topic.
Infants can smell and taste quite well, even very shortly after being born. Actually, they have this quality even before birth. The amniotic fluid in the mother's womb is full of tastes and scents, which reflect what the mother herself is eating and drinking. In fact, a baby will often show a preference for the same tastes as its mother. If the mother drank orange juice frequently while she was pregnant, the baby will prefer this same taste. Babies show a preference for sweet tastes in general, which actually tends to have a calming effect on them. On the other hand, they show aversion towards sour and bitter tastes. An interesting point is that they respond with different facial expressions to those two tastes, which seems to show that they differentiate between them. Babies also show the ability to recognize specific smells. This works in a similar way to taste, since a baby will tend to like smells that it was exposed to in the womb. However, an infant can also identify its mother's particular smell and will show a preference for it over those of other women. Babies also show both attraction and aversion for totally new smells. They will frown or turn away if you give them fish, but a banana or vanilla-scented toy will make them smile.
Explain how the examples in the lecture support the information in the reading. Now listen to a conversation between a student and a campus financial advisor.
Good morning. My name is Jeff.
Hi, I'm Kathy.
How can I help you this morning, Kathy?
I really need some advice about something. I think I might have to drop out.
I hope that won't be the case. The financial office is here to help if we can. Are you having problems paying your tuition?
No, not that. It's living expenses. My credit card debt is huge. This month, it's up to $5,000. I'm working full-time, but I can't pay that much. I don't even know how it got that high.
Probably because you just weren't paying attention. This is no reason to quit school, but you're going to have to take care of it, though, or the problem will only get worse. You have basically two options. One is to strictly monitor your budget and expenses. You'll have to write down everything you earn along with everything you spend, and make sure they're balanced. And you absolutely must pay your entire credit card bill every month, along with the debt you've built up. You have to be disciplined and patient, but you'll work your way out of debt eventually.
Okay, what's the other method?
Get rid of your credit card. Cut it up. You'll still have to pay your debt, but at least you won't be able to build up any more. Either way, you have to give up something.
Now listen to part of a lecture in a business class.
An organization is composed of a hierarchy of people. In theory, at least, those with more skills and talent have higher positions, with more responsibility and better pay. The more competence an employee shows, the higher he or she will be promoted over time. But what happens when a person is promoted into a position he or she can't handle? This isn't supposed to happen, at least not in theory. In practice, however, things are often different. This fact was expressed by Lawrence J. Peter in his book, The Peter Principle. Its main idea is, quoting from the book, in a hierarchy, every employee tends to rise to his level of incompetence. This is intended to be a funny exaggeration, but it does describe something that actually happens. An employee who is perfectly competent at one kind of work may not be capable of doing something more complex, and promotion is often based more on perceived skills than actual ones. Even great competence in one position is not necessarily a reason to promote an employee to a higher, more demanding one. Then, there is the possibility that the managers doing the promoting are themselves above the level of their competence. The implication of the Peter Principle is that any long-lasting, stable organization is likely to have incompetent employees at many levels. There may be much less of a problem at newer companies that are still growing, but the same thing will happen eventually. This presents a challenge for management since it must be concerned not only with keeping employees out of positions they are not suited for, but also avoiding becoming incompetent itself.
Using points and examples from the lecture, explain the Peter Principle and how it affects business organizations. Writing section. Now listen to part of a lecture on the topic you just read about.
Okay, so in history, sometimes people like to look for the simplest and clearest explanations. While that may be a good rule of thumb for answering some questions, it is not always the case when seeking to understand and explain historical processes. Take the Industrial Revolution, for example. Now, you may have read about how it started in Britain in the 18th century, and that the massive social transformations were, to a large extent, driven by technological change and population growth. These were certainly two factors, but when seeking to explain the causes of such a vast process, there is often a tendency to elevate a few factors to be the most important explanatory causes, when in fact those factors are themselves tied to other factors, and so on, and it becomes less clear which is more important than the other. Now, the technological changes mentioned in your books didn't just come about out of thin air, or because a few brilliant inventors were working around the clock. In fact, the creation of new inventions required an enormous amount of financial and political support, both of which were present in Britain from around the end of the 17th century. This small island was expanding trade to its colonies during that time, and bringing in large amounts of capital. Trade and extensive geographic exploration also created a more liberalized environment in which the government at that time was willing to encourage independently financed research and development. And as goods were produced, Britain could sell them in their colonies as captive markets. For example, cotton came from India. But as a British colony, the law required that all cotton go to Britain to be made into cloth, and that was the only cloth that could be sold in India, a captive market. So you see, there was international trade, a liberalized domestic environment, and captive markets. Without them, you could have natural resources and innovation with nowhere to go. This brings us to a second point. The institutional and legal landscape in Britain had several important changes that facilitated what your text calls population growth. It is true that the population had grown sizable by the later 18th century, and that increased food supplies allowed that to happen. However, the idea that cities grew because technology drove the agricultural revolution is a gross simplification and rather inaccurate. In fact, during the 2 centuries preceding the Industrial Revolution, a series of laws were passed that forced a large percentage of the rural population off the land and into cities. And remember that up to this time, over 3/4 of all people lived in the rural land off agriculture. For example, take the enclosure movement. Traditionally, agricultural land was divided into small parcels, with shared sections called commons. Among those laws I just mentioned, some broke up the commons and small parcels to make them available for sale to merchants who were emerging as wealthy and powerful players in colonial Britain. Technology was a part of efficiently utilizing the land that had been taken for investment, but that came later, and by that point, much of the rural population that had been making a modest living off the commons was forced to move to the cities and towns in search of whatever work was available to support themselves.
Summarize the points made in the lecture you just heard, explaining how they contradict points made in the reading.